The Memphis air hung thick and humid, a familiar blanket Elvis Presley had known his entire life. It was late afternoon. The sun, a fiery orb dipping towards the horizon, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns of Graceland. Inside, the grand house hummed with its usual activity, phones ringing, assistants bustling, the distant strum of a guitar. From the den where Scotty Moore was probably tinkering with a new riff, Elvis, however, was in a rare moment of quiet, perched on a velvet armchair in the living room, a half-read script for his next movie, resting, forgotten, on his lap. He was tired. Not physically, not exactly. It was more a weariness of the soul, a subtle hum beneath the surface of his superstar life. Every day was a performance, every interaction a public one. Even here in his own home, the weight of being Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, never truly lifted. He loved his fans. He truly did. He loved the music, the lights, the roar of the crowd. But sometimes he longed for a moment of quiet, a space where he was just plain old Elvis. Aaron Presley from Tupelo, Mississippi. It was Joe Esposito, his longtime friend and foreman of his Memphis Mafia, holding a large cream-colored envelope. "Another one for you. Special delivery." Elvis took the envelope, turning it over in his hands. It was unusually thick, weighty, and had a formal seal on the back. Not a fan letter, not a business proposal. He broke the seal carefully with his thumb. Inside, nestled among layers of tissue paper, was a small, exquisitely rendered charcoal sketch of a hand reaching out as if offering something. It was simple, yet incredibly detailed, the lines of the palm, the slight tremor in the fingers. It felt alive. Beneath the sketch was a letter penned in an elegant, flowing script. "Dear Mr. Presley, my name is Clara Vance. I am an artist, and for many years now I have admired your profound impact on the world, not just through your music, but through the spirit you embody. I have long held a deep conviction that true art captures not just the surface, but the unseen depths, the very essence of a person." Elvis raised an eyebrow. "Unseen depths," he murmured. Most portraits of him focused on his iconic sneer, his piercing blue eyes, his chiseled jaw. He'd sat for dozens of artists over the years, all eager to capture the image of Elvis. The letter continued. "I understand the immense demands on your time and privacy, but I believe there is a portrait of you waiting to be painted, one that goes beyond the legend and speaks to the man beneath. I wish to undertake this project, not as a commission, but as an artistic endeavor, a tribute to the raw authenticity I believe resides within you. I work primarily in oil, with a focus on capturing emotional truth, rather than mere photographic likeness. My style is perhaps unconventional, but I am confident I can create a piece that resonates with a different kind of power. I would require several sittings, perhaps 4 or 5 at your convenience ideally, at a location where you feel most at ease. I am based in Nashville, but I am prepared to travel to Memphis. I have enclosed a small sample of my work, the charcoal sketch, to give you a sense of my hand. I understand if this proposal seems audacious, but I felt compelled to reach out. The opportunity to paint you, Mr. Presley, would be an extraordinary privilege. Sincerely, Clara Vance." Elvis reread the letter, then looked at the charcoal sketch again. The hand was undeniably captivating. It wasn't perfect, not idealized. There was a subtle line of weariness in the knuckles, a hint of vulnerability in the way the fingers curved. It wasn't a hand reaching out for adoration, but for connection. Joe, ever watchful, cleared his throat. "Another portrait? You've got enough of those to fill a gallery." Elvis chuckled, a low rumble in his chest. "This one's different, Joe. She says she wants to paint the unseen depths." "Sounds a bit fartsy, Joe said, ever practical. "You want me to get Colonel Parker on the phone? He'll screen her." "No," Elvis said, surprisingly firm. "Not yet. This isn't about business, not really. It feels personal." Thought about the fatigue he'd felt earlier, the longing for a break from the constant performance. Maybe this Clara Vance, with her talk of emotional truth, could see something beyond the rhinestones and the stage lights. It was a long shot, perhaps a foolish one, but something about her directness, her conviction, resonated with that quiet part of him. "Find out about her, Joe," Elvis instructed, handing him the envelope. "Not through the colonel, just discreetly. See what kind of artist she is. If she's legit." Joe nodded, his expression a mix of bewilderment and resignation. Elvis, for all his fame and power, often had these impulsive ideas, and usually they led to something interesting. As Joe left, Elvis leaned back, the image of the reaching hand imprinted in his mind. He wasn't sure why, but he felt a flicker of intrigue he hadn't felt in a long time. It was a risk, letting someone try to see past the persona, but something about Clara Vance's invitation felt honest. He wondered what unseen depths she thought he had, and more importantly, he wondered what she would find. Days later, Joe had indeed done his research. Clara Vance was legitimate. She wasn't famous, but she had a small, dedicated following in Nashville's art scene. Her exhibitions were noted for their intensity, her portraits often described as unflinching and soul-stirring. She preferred to work with subjects who had lived a bit, people with stories etched onto their faces. Authenticity was a word that came up often in reviews of her work. This only deepened Elvis's curiosity. The date was set. Clara Vance would arrive at Graceland on a Tuesday morning. Elvis had cleared his schedule. A rare feat. He even asked his chef, Nancy, to prepare a simple, wholesome lunch. Nothing too extravagant. He wanted the atmosphere to be relaxed, not like a formal business meeting or a press event. When the doorbell rang, Elvis was in the living room, trying to project an air of casual nonchalance. Joe answered it. A few moments later, he reappeared, ushering in a woman who was not at all what Elvis had pictured. He'd imagined an older, perhaps eccentric artist, someone with paint splatters on her clothes and wild, artistic hair. Clara Vance was none of those things. She looked to be in her early 30s with intelligent, observant eyes that seemed to take everything in at once. Her hair, a warm chestnut brown, was pulled back in a neat, practical ponytail. She wore simple, dark clothing, a black turtleneck and tailored trousers that seemed to blend into the background as if to say, "I am here to observe, not to be observed." She carried a large worn leather portfolio and a wooden easel, which Joe immediately took from her. "Mr. Presley," she said, her voice quiet but clear, extending a hand. "Thank you for seeing me." Her handshake was firm, confident. "Please call me Elvis," he said, offering his famous dazzling smile. He expected a flutter, a blush, maybe a nervous giggle. Most people reacted that way. Clara Vance simply nodded, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. Her eyes, however, were already studying him, not in a star's professional gaze that made him feel seen, and also a little exposed. "And I'm Clara," she replied. "It's an honor to be here, Elvis." "The honor's mine," he said genuinely. "This okay for a studio? Or would you prefer somewhere else?" Clara looked around, her gaze lingering on the ornate furniture, the heavy drapes, the famous white piano. "It's very grand," she said thoughtfully, "but perhaps a little less formal for the sittings. I prefer natural light if possible, and a space where you can truly relax." Elvis led her to the sunroom, a brighter, airier space filled with plants and comfortable wicker furniture. It was less imposing than the main living room, and indeed felt more relaxed. "How about here?" Clara's eyes lit up. "Perfect. The light is wonderful, and it feels more lived in." While Joe helped her set up her easel and materials, Elvis watched her. She moved with purpose, carefully unpacking tubes of paint, brushes, a palette, and various tools. She had a methodical calmness about her that was a stark contrast to the usual whirlwind of activity that surrounded him. "So, unseen depths, huh?" Elvis prompted, leaning against a doorframe, trying to sound casual. What exactly does that mean to an artist? Clara paused, looking up from her supplies. Means, she began, her voice gaining a quiet passion, that I'm not interested in painting what the world already sees. Everyone knows the public Elvis Presley, the singer, the actor, the icon. But every person has layers. There's the self they present, the self they are with loved ones, and the self they are when they're truly Elvis felt a shiver. He hadn't expected such directness, such a probing statement. It was a little unsettling. He'd carefully crafted his public persona, the one that thrilled millions. To think someone wanted to peel that back, it was both fascinating and a little frightening. And how do you reach that? He asked, his voice softer than he intended. Clara picked up a charcoal stick, testing its weight. By listening, by observing, by creating a space where you can simply be without the expectation of performance. She looked directly at him, her eyes calm and unwavering. My job isn't to create a flattering image, Elvis. It's to create a truthful one. He found himself holding her gaze, feeling a strange blend of respect and apprehension. This wasn't going to be like any other portrait sitting he'd ever had. This was going to be different. And part of him, the part that longed for something real, was ready for it. All right, Clara, he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. Let's see what you find. The first sitting was less about posing and more about quiet observation. Clara didn't immediately grab her brushes. Instead, she spent the initial hour simply watching Elvis. He sat in a comfortable armchair, chosen by Clara for its soft fabric and natural light. She would occasionally sketch in a small notebook, her eyes flitting from his hands to his profile, to the way his brow furrowed when he was lost in thought. Don't feel like you have to hold still, Elvis, she had said. Just be yourself, relax, read a book, listen to music, whatever feels natural. So he did. He picked up the forgotten script from his last movie and pretended to read, but mostly he was aware of Clara's presence, the quiet rustle of her charcoal stick on paper. It felt strange, this intense, silent scrutiny. He was used to being watched, but usually by adoring crowds, by photographers capturing a moment for posterity. This felt different, more intimate, almost invasive in its stillness. Tell me about your music, Elvis, Clara said after a while, her voice gentle, breaking the quiet. She wasn't looking at him, but at the easel her head tilted as she worked on a rough sketch. Talked about growing up in Tupelo, the gospel music in church, the blues he heard on Beale Street, the way everything came together in his head. He talked about the raw energy of his early performances, the thrill of connecting with an audience. He spoke about the challenges of the movie career, the feeling of being pulled in different directions. He even shared a little about his love for spirituals and the joy he found in singing them late at night just for himself. Clara listened, truly listened. She didn't interrupt, didn't offer effusive praise. Her only responses were soft hums of acknowledgement or the occasional murmur HMM. It was surprisingly easy to talk to her. She wasn't asking for an interview, she was simply absorbing, processing. By the end of the first session, she had only a few preliminary sketches and a canvas with some broad washes of color. That's enough for today, she said, carefully cleaning her brushes. Thank you, Elvis. You are very patient. Over the next few weeks, the sittings continued typically, lasting 2 to 3 hours, each time. Clara encouraged him to be himself. Sometimes he would listen to records on the phonograph in the sunroom, his eyes closed. Sometimes he'd pace restlessly, and sometimes he'd simply sit in silence, lost in thought. He found himself opening up to her more than he had anticipated. He talked about his mother, Gladys, and how much he missed her. He spoke of the loneliness that often accompanied fame, the difficulty of trusting people, the constant pressure to be Elvis. He even confessed his insecurities, the times he felt like a fraud, a boy from Tupelo playing a part. Clara, in turn, shared bits of her own life. She spoke of her childhood, growing up in a small town in Tennessee, how she found solace and expression in art. She talked about her struggles as an emerging artist, the rejections, the times she doubted her own vision. She described her philosophy of art, her belief that beauty wasn't always perfect or polished, but often found in the flaws, the lines of experience, the echoes of pain and joy that shaped a person. People want to see what they expect to see, she'd said one afternoon, her brow furrowed in concentration as she meticulously blended a shade of paint. They want the beautiful, the heroic, the flawless, but the truest beauty, the most compelling beauty, is in the complexity. It's in the shadows as much as in the light. Elvis had looked at the canvas. It was still very abstract, just a swirling mass of colors, but he could sense a darkness, a moodiness to it that surprised him. It wasn't bright and vibrant like most of his album covers. He felt a flicker of apprehension. He tried to joke about it. "Hope you're not planning on painting me with a big, ugly scowl, Clara." She'd smiled, a rare, gentle smile that softened her intense features. "I'm painting what's there, Elvis, sometimes. What's there isn't. What we want to present to the world, but it's no less a part of us." Her words lingered. He was used to controlling his image, curating every public appearance, every photograph, but with Clara he had no control. He was simply a subject, raw material for her artistic vision. It was a vulnerable position to be in, yet he trusted her. He trusted the quiet sincerity in her eyes, the earnestness in her voice. He felt a strange kind of bond forming between them, a connection rooted in shared vulnerability and a mutual respect for the truth. However uncomfortable it might be, as the sittings progressed, the canvas slowly began to take shape. He still couldn't discern much beyond broad strokes of color and form, but he noticed that Clara was spending a lot of time on his eyes, on the lines around his mouth. He began to feel a growing sense of unease, a knot forming in his stomach. He was curious, yes, but also deeply, fundamentally anxious about what Clara Vance, with her talk of unseen depths and truth, was truly seeing, and what she was putting on that canvas. The fourth sitting, the canvas was now undeniably a portrait. Elvis could make out his features, the distinctive sweep of his hair, the strong line of his jaw, but it wasn't the Elvis he saw in the mirror or the one he saw on magazine covers. It was different. Clara had been working on the eyes for what felt like hours. She used fine brushes, meticulously adding layers, then stepping back, tilting her head, squinting. She was completely absorbed, a lock of hair falling across her face, smudges of paint on her cheek. "Almost done with this section," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "Just need to get the light right." Elvis had been trying not to stare at the canvas, respecting Clara's process. But curiosity was a powerful current. He'd catch glimpses, fleeting impressions. Colors were muted, almost melancholic. Deep blues, grays, and shadows of brown, punctuated by unexpected flashes of almost electric blue. In the eyes. He cleared his throat. "So, how's it looking?" he asked, trying to sound nonchalant, but his heart was doing a strange little jig against his ribs. Clara paused, stepping back from the easel. She looked at him, then at the portrait. A faint, almost imperceptible hesitation crossed her features. "It's coming along, Elvis," she said, her voice a little softer than usual. "It's capturing something, I think. Something good, I hope." He tried to joke, but it felt hollow even to his own ears. She didn't return his smile. Instead, she gestured with her brush. "Come closer if you like. I'm at a point where you can see the direction." Elvis walked slowly towards the easel, his stomach tightening with each step. He stood beside her looking at the painting. It was undeniably him, but it was a version of him he rarely, if ever, allowed the world to see. The eyes were piercing, yes, but they held a profound weariness, a deep-seated melancholy that felt almost raw. There were subtle lines around them that spoke of sleepless nights, of worries unseen. The famous full lips, usually curled in a confident sneer or a charming smile, were set in a somber, almost vulnerable line. There was a faint shadow beneath his chin, a slight slump to his shoulders that hinted at a burden. The overall palette was somber, not vibrant and energetic like the king of rock and roll. It wasn't ugly, not exactly, but it wasn't flattering. It was stark, it was honest, and it was unsettling. He saw the famous charisma. Yes, but it was overshadowed by something else. A deep, almost spiritual exhaustion. It was the Elvis who sat alone at night wrestling with his thoughts. The man who felt the crushing weight of expectation, the burden of a legend. "It's powerful," he managed to say the word, catching in his throat. He felt a strange disconnect, like looking at a stranger who wore his face. He saw the truth Clara had spoken, of the unseen depths, and it startled him. He had shown her these parts of himself in their conversations. Yes, but he hadn't expected her to paint them so explicitly. Clara watched him, her expression unreadable. "It's a reflection of what I've seen," she said quietly. "Of what you've shared, the strength, yes, but also the struggle, the weight." He swallowed, trying to find his voice. He wanted to say something, anything, to soften the blow, to make it more palatable, but the words wouldn't come. He was a performer, a master of controlling emotion, but this was different. This was his emotion, laid bare on a canvas for him to see. He turned away from the portrait, pacing a few steps, running a hand through his hair. "It's a lot to take in, Clara. I understand," she said, her voice gentle. She didn't apologize, didn't try to explain away her artistic choices. She simply acknowledged his reaction. It's not what most people expect of me," he said finally. The words felt small, inadequate. "Perhaps not," Clara replied. "But is it not a part of you? The part that sometimes longs for quiet? The part that carries the immense responsibility of your life? The part that seeks truth?" Her questions hung in the air. He couldn't deny it. Every word she spoke resonated with the quiet, weary part of him he tried to keep hidden. But to see it externalized, to see it painted with such unflinching honesty, was a different matter entirely. He stood there for a long moment, looking out the sunroom window at the green expanse of his lawn. The vibrant, sunny world outside felt a million miles away from the somber truth on Clara's canvas. He felt a profound sense of vulnerability, a feeling he rarely experienced. This wasn't a bad painting, it was too skillfully rendered for that. But it was a painting that confronted him, that made him look at aspects of himself he preferred to keep locked away. The final unveiling, he knew, would be an even greater challenge. He wasn't sure if he was ready for it. After that unsettling glimpse, Elvis found it harder to relax during the final sittings. He became more aware of Clara's gaze, more conscious of his own expressions. He tried to project a more stoic, less vulnerable image, but he knew it was futile. Clara had already seen him, truly seen him, and put that truth onto the canvas. He tried to distract himself. During one session, he started singing softly, humming old blues tunes. Then gospel. Clara didn't tell him to stop. In fact, she seemed to listen intently, her brushstrokes seeming to follow the rhythm of his voice. He realized she wasn't just painting his face. She was painting his spirit, his sound, his very essence. And that essence, he now knew, was far more complex and layered than the public image he presented. The final sitting was brief. Clara spent most of it on fine details, the subtle play of light and shadow, the texture of his skin, the almost imperceptible tremor in his hand. She worked in silence, her brow furrowed in intense concentration. Elvis watched her, a strange mix of dread and anticipation swirling within him. He wanted it to be over, but he also wanted to see the finished product, to confront the image that was so clearly unsettling him. Finally, she stepped back, letting out a soft sigh. "It's done," she said, her voice quiet. She looked at the canvas for a long moment, her head tilted as if evaluating not just the painting but the weight of the truth it contained. Then she turned to him. "It's finished." Elvis. He slowly rose from his chair, his legs feeling heavy. The sunroom felt still hushed, as if even the plants were holding their breath. He walked towards the easel, his gaze fixed on the draped canvas. Clara had covered it with a light cloth. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice gentle, almost a whisper. There was no fanfare, no dramatic unveiling. Just two people, an artist and her subject, in the culmination of weeks of intimate observation. He took a deep breath. "As I'll ever be, I reckon." Clara reached out, her fingers brushing the fabric, and slowly, deliberately pulled it away. The portrait was indeed finished, and it was even more jarring than his previous glimpse had suggested. It was undeniably him, the famous face recognized by millions, but this was not the flamboyant Maidoc showman. This was not the movie star with the perfect smile. This was Elvis, stripped bare. The colors were muted. His skin had a pale, almost translucent quality, and the shadows were deep, almost bruised beneath his eyes. His gaze, those famous blue eyes, held a profound sadness, a world weariness that seemed to pierce right to the canvas. His mouth, usually so expressive, was set in a tight, almost grim line, as if holding back a torrent of unspoken words. The famous hair seemed a little disheveled, not perfectly coiffed, and there were faint lines etched on his forehead, signs of worry and strain. It was a portrait of a man burdened by his own legend, captured the loneliness of fame, the quiet struggle behind the dazzling facade. It was not a celebratory image. It was a contemplative, almost sorrowful one. Elvis felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He felt exposed, stripped raw. Every insecurity, every moment of doubt, every private moment of exhaustion seemed to be reflected in the paint. He saw the years of relentless touring, the demands of the movie studio, the constant pressure to be Elvis. He saw the toll it had taken. His initial visceral reaction was a wave of something akin to revulsion. "This isn't me," he thought fiercely. "This isn't the Elvis. The world knows this isn't the Elvis I want people to see." He felt a flush of indignation, followed by a profound sense of embarrassment. What if others saw this? What would they think? Would they see the weakness he so carefully concealed? He stood there for what felt like an eternity, his mind reeling, trying to reconcile the image before him with the one he had spent his life cultivating. It was a beautiful painting in a technical sense. The brushstrokes were masterful, the use of light and shadow exquisite. But the subject was a raw nerve, laid bare. He could feel Clara's eyes on him, waiting. The silence in the room stretched heavy and expectant. His heart pounded in his chest, a frantic drumbeat against his ribs. He felt a surge of anger, a desire to dismiss it, to say it was wrong that she hadn't captured him at all. But then he looked at Clara. She stood there, small and still beside her work, her face pale, her expression a mix of vulnerability and quiet strength. He saw the earnestness in her eyes, the passion for truth he had come to respect. He remembered their conversations, the trust he had placed in her. He remembered her words. "My job isn't to create a flattering image, Elvis. It's to create a truthful one." And in that moment, something shifted within him. He realized that while the portrait might not be the image he wanted to see, it was in a brutal, unflinching way a part of the truth, his truth, and she had poured her heart and soul into capturing it. To dismiss it, to scorn it, would not just be a rejection of the painting, but a rejection of her vision, of the trust they had built. And that, he knew, would be a far greater ugliness than anything on the canvas. He took another deep breath, letting the anger dissipate, letting something else rise in its place. He turned to her, forcing a steady calm into his voice. Elvis stood before the portrait, a chasm opening in his chest. It wasn't just a painting. It was a mirror reflecting a hidden self, a man burdened by his own magnificent creation. The famous Jolene was there, the striking blue eyes, but in this rendering they were aged by an unseen weight, shadowed by a quiet sorrow. He fought fiercely to conceal this wasn't the grinning, hip-swiveling king. This was a king perhaps, but one heavy with his crown, isolated on a lonely throne. The silence in the sunroom was deafening, amplified by the frantic beat of his own heart. He could feel Clara's gaze on him, expectant, vulnerable. She had poured her artistic soul into this, bearing her interpretation of his unseen depths. And what she had found, what she had revealed, was a truth he barely acknowledged to himself, let alone to the world. His first impulse was a raw primal rejection. No, this isn't me. This can't be me. The image of the legendary Elvis, the invincible idol, flashed through his mind, starkly contrasting with the weary figure on the canvas. He felt a wave of indignation, then a burning shame. What would the Colonel say? What would the fans think? He could almost hear the whispers, the critiques. But then he forced himself to look again. Really look. Beyond the initial shock, beyond his own discomfort, he saw the undeniable skill. The way the light caught the slight tremor in his hand, a detail she must have observed from his moments of restlessness. The way the shadows deepened the hollows beneath his eyes, suggesting not just fatigue but a profound melancholy. The brushstrokes were confident, deliberate, each one placed with intention. This wasn't an amateur's clumsy attempt. It was the work of a true artist. And Clara. She stood there, hands clasped in front of her, her slight frame radiating an immense vulnerability. Her face was pale, her intelligent eyes searching his, seeking a reaction, a judgment. He remembered her words. "My job isn't to create a flattering image, Elvis. It's to create a truthful one." He thought of their conversations, the parts of himself he had hesitantly revealed to her, his anxieties, his loneliness, the immense pressure of living up to the Elvis Presley legend. She had listened without judgment, had seemed to understand. She had seen the man behind the myth, and in seeing that man she had painted this. A different kind of thought began to form in his mind, slowly pushing back the wave of rejection. If this was indeed a truth, however uncomfortable, then her artistry lay in her ability to perceive and portray it. To invalidate her work would be to invalidate her, and perhaps even to invalidate the part of himself she had managed to capture. He felt a sudden pang of empathy for her. She had taken a risk, dared to go beyond the superficial. To tell her he hated it, to crush her spirit, would be a betrayal of the trust they had built. It would be unkind, and Elvis at his core, despite the fame and the demands, was a kind man. His mother had raised him that way. "Always treat people with respect, son," she'd said 1,000 times. "Everyone's fighting their own battles you know nothing about." This was Clara's battle, the struggle to create, to express her truth. And he, Elvis Presley, of all people, understood what it meant to fight for your vision, to face skepticism and misunderstanding. Turned from the portrait, not looking at it again, but turning his full attention to Clara. He saw the apprehension in her eyes, the slight tremble of her lip. Took a slow breath, letting out the tension he hadn't realized he was holding. He decided in that moment that he would not lie, not truly, but he would choose his words with care, with the kindness and respect she deserved. He had to acknowledge the truth of her skill, the raw power of her vision, even if the truth she saw was one he preferred to keep hidden. "Clara," he began, his voice surprisingly steady, a soft rumble in the quiet room. Paused, collecting his thoughts, choosing each word carefully. He met her gaze, his own famous blue eyes, though perhaps a touch more weary than usual, held hers with genuine warmth. This is truly something else." He didn't say beautiful, he didn't say flattering, he didn't even say, "It's me." But what he said next, the genuine words of a man choosing compassion over ego, would be remembered by Clara Vance for the rest of her life. Elvis looked at Clara, his famous features softened by an unexpected vulnerability. The sunroom, usually a place of light and ease, felt charged with the silent hum of his internal struggle. He knew the words he chose now would echo far beyond this room, affecting not just Clara, but perhaps even his own understanding of himself. "Clara," he repeated, his voice low, steady. "That he truly something else?" He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. He could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes, wide and searching, clung to his every expression. Took a slow step towards her, putting a comfortable distance between them and the canvas. "You told me you wanted to paint the unseen depths he continued, his voice gaining a soft sincerity. You told me you wanted to paint the truth, and Clara, you sure as heaven did. He didn't say I love it. He didn't say it's my favorite portrait. He couldn't. Not truthfully, not for himself, but he could acknowledge her achievement, her vision, the way you captured the light in the eyes. He gestured vaguely towards the painting without looking directly at it again. It's like you saw right into my soul, and the shadows are so real, so honest. He met her gaze again. A slight, almost imperceptible tremor in his own voice. It's powerful, Clara, truly powerful. I've never seen anything like it. He saw the relief flood her face, the way her shoulders visibly relaxed. The tension in the room seemed to dissipate like morning mist. She still looked a little bewildered, as if she expected a different reaction, but the fear in her eyes was replaced by a fragile hope. You really think so, Elvis? She whispered, her voice barely audible. I know so, he affirmed, nodding slowly. Look, Clara, most artists, they want to paint the image, the one on the albums, the one on the movie posters, and that's fine. That's what folks expect. But you didn't do that. You saw something different, something deeper. He paused, choosing his words with care. It makes a man think, you know. It makes you look at yourself, not just at the face you show the world, but at everything that's going on underneath. He was speaking the truth, a truth he was only just discovering himself. Portrait was unsettling precisely because it was so revealing. It was a mirror held up to his hidden self, the self he wrestled with in the quiet hours of the night. And for Clara to have seen that, and to have portrayed it with such unflinching skill, was indeed powerful. Clara's eyes glistened. A small, tentative smile touched her lips. Thank you, Elvis, she said, her voice thick with emotion. That means everything, more than you know. Could see the effort, the vulnerability, the passion she had poured into her work. And for him to respond with anything less than genuine appreciation for her, and her effort would have been unthinkable. His distaste for the image of himself it presented was his own struggle, his own private battle. It had nothing to do with her worth as an artist. You've challenged me, Clara, he said, a genuine smile finally gracing his lips, one that reached his weary eyes. You've really challenged me. And that's a good thing. Art ought to do that sometimes. Shouldn't it make you think, make you feel something real, even if it's uncomfortable? He glanced briefly at the portrait again. A different kind of curiosity, now mixing with the initial shock. He still didn't like seeing himself that way, but he could no longer deny its truth, nor the immense skill with which it was rendered. He knew with absolute certainty that he could not hang this portrait in his living room, not where everyone who entered Graceland would see it. But he also knew he could not simply dismiss it or discard it. It held too much of his truth and too much of Clara's heart. So he said, turning back to Clara, a practical note entering his voice. What happens now? Is there a price for a work like this? He reached into his pocket for his wallet. Clara shook her head, a small, firm gesture. No, Elvis, I told you this wasn't a commission. It was an artistic endeavor. The opportunity to paint you was the payment. Elvis chuckled softly. But I can't just let you walk out of here, empty-handed, Clara. Your time, your materials, your incredible talent, it deserves more than just a thank you. Pulled out a wad of cash, more than enough to cover her expenses, and then some, pressing it gently into her hand. Consider it a donation to the arts, or a personal token of my deepest respect for your vision. Clara looked down at the money, then back at him, tears brimming in her eyes. You're incredibly kind, Elvis. Just trying to be honest, he said with a quiet sincerity. Just trying to be true to what I feel. And in that moment, surrounded by the quiet hum of the sunroom, Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, had shown a kindness that transcended fame and ego. He had acknowledged a truth he found personally painful, yet he had uplifted the artist who had dared to reveal it. After Clara Vance had carefully packed up her paints and easel, helped by Joe Esposito, who still looked utterly baffled by the whole endeavor, Graceland felt strangely quiet. Elvis watched her car disappear down the driveway, the portrait carefully secured in the bag. He had not asked to keep it immediately, knowing he needed time to process. She had offered to deliver it to him once it was fully dry and varnished. He walked back into the sunroom, which now felt empty without the easel and the scent of oil paint. He sat down in the armchair, the one he had posed in for countless hours, and stared at the empty space where the portrait had been. His initial revulsion had softened, replaced by a complex cocktail of emotions. Discomfort, yes, but also a grudging respect and a profound introspection. Elvis chuckled a dry sound. "No, Joe, it ain't." He paused. "She painted what she saw. What I let her see, I guess." He rubbed his temples. It's honest, maybe too honest, for comfort." Joe, for all his practicality, had been with Elvis through thick and thin and understood him better than most. Sometimes the truth ain't pretty. It doesn't mean it ain't true. "No," Elvis agreed, looking out at the sunlit garden. "Doesn't mean it ain't true." He thought about the weariness in the painted eyes, the subtle lines of worry. He thought about the nights. He couldn't sleep, the constant pressure of touring, recording, filming, the endless demands, the loneliness that could creep in even amidst the adoration of millions. Clara had seen all of that. She had captured it. He thought of the hundreds of photographs, the posed shots, the album covers, the movie stills, all carefully carbureted, designed to present a certain image, strong, medoc, eternally youthful, effortlessly cool. That was the Elvis the world wanted, the Elvis he worked tirelessly to be. But the portrait had showed the cost of that. He remembered Clara's words. "It's a reflection of what I've seen. The strength, yes, but also the struggle, the weight." And then his own words. "You've challenged me, Clara." Art ought to do that sometimes, shouldn't it? Make you think, make you feel something real, even if it's uncomfortable. He had spoken those words with genuine conviction, not just to comfort Clara, but because he believed them. He had always respected authenticity, whether in music, in people, or in art. He had been raised on gospel music, on the raw, honest emotion of the blues. He understood that true depth often lay beyond the polished surface, but to have that depth, his own depth, revealed so starkly, that was a different matter over the next few days. Not in a negative way, not anymore. With that initial burst of rejection, it was more like a persistent question, a quiet challenge. Every time he caught a glimpse of himself in a mirror or saw a photograph, he saw that Elvis, the weary, contemplative man Clara had painted, lurking beneath the surface of the public persona. He spoke to Priscilla about it carefully, one evening after she'd put Lisa Marie to bed. He didn't show her a picture of the portrait, just described it, focusing on Clara's talent and the unflinching honesty of the piece. Priscilla listened patiently, her brow furrowed. "So it's not how you see yourself, but how she saw you." "Or how I really am, deep down," Elvis admitted, his voice quiet. "The part I tried to hide," Priscilla reached out, taking his hand. "Elvis, you're human. You have burdens just like anyone else." Maybe she just captured that. Maybe it's not something to hide, but something to acknowledge. Her words resonated. It wasn't about weakness. It was about truth. He had always been an open book in many ways. His emotions on stage were raw and powerful, but the quieter, more vulnerable parts, those were fiercely guarded. Clara had slipped past the guard. He started to think about the painting not as an ugly reflection, but as a profound insight. It was a reminder that even the king of rock and roll was a man with fears and weariness and complex emotions. It was a testament to Clara's courage, and to his own for letting her see him. He hadn't asked her where she was taking the painting. She had mentioned needing it for a few days for the varnish to dry properly. He wondered what she would do with it. Would she exhibit it? Would she sell it? The thought of it being displayed for all the world to see, the weary Elvis, still made him uncomfortable. But then a new thought emerged. Maybe that discomfort was part of the challenge, part of the truth he needed to face. The seed of a decision began to form in his mind, something that would honor Clara's work, and his own journey of acceptance. Days turned into a week, then 2. The portrait had been delivered back to Graceland, carefully crated and placed in a quiet, unused study. Elvis hadn't looked at it again since its return. He was still processing. The more he thought about it, the more Clara's portrait became less about an unflattering image and more about a profound statement. It was a mirror, yes, but also a sort of emotional map showing the landscape of his inner world. He realized that perhaps the discomfort he felt wasn't because it was a bad painting, but because it showed a part of him he rarely acknowledged. He found himself thinking about other artists he admired, musicians who poured their raw pain and joy into their songs, actors who weren't afraid to portray difficult, flawed characters. He too had strived for authenticity, in his music to sing from his gut, to connect with people on an emotional level. Why then was he so afraid of that same authenticity in an image of himself? One afternoon he found himself drawn to the study. He stood before the crated painting for a long time, hands in his pockets, feeling a strange pull towards it. He decided it was time. He gently lifted the crate lid, then carefully removed the portrait. He set it on an easel in the corner, facing away from the door, away from direct sunlight. He didn't want to display it for public consumption, not yet, maybe never. But he wanted it there, where he could see it when he chose to, when he was ready. He looked at it again, truly looked, without the immediate surge of rejection or self-consciousness. He let his gaze wander over the details, the shadowed eyes, yes, but also the strong, defiant tilt of the head, the weary set of the mouth, but also the hint of a nascent smile, barely there, but present. He saw the resilience, the endurance, the quiet strength that had carried him through so much. It wasn't just a portrait of weariness. It was a portrait of a man who had endured weariness. A man who had faced immense pressure and still stood tall, even if bowed by the weight of it all. It was a testament to his humanity, not a judgment of his flaws. He began to see the true artistry of Clara Vance's work. She hadn't just painted what she saw. She had painted what she understood. She hadn't flattered him, but she hadn't condemned him either. She had simply captured a complex truth. He thought of the kindness he had extended to her, the choice to praise her effort and vision despite his initial shock. He realized that in that moment he had also shown kindness to himself, to the part of him that was vulnerable and human. By accepting her truth, he was beginning to accept his own. The portrait became a quiet companion. Sometimes he would sit in the study for a few minutes, just looking at it, letting its silence speak to him. He found a strange comfort in its honesty. It was a reminder that it was okay to be tired, to feel the weight of his responsibilities, to be human. He didn't always have to be Elvis Presley, the king. Sometimes it was enough to be Elvis, Aaron Presley, a man trying his best. He realized the experience had shifted something within him. He found himself more introspective, more aware of his own inner landscape. He started to pay more attention to the people around him, looking beyond their surface, trying to see their unseen depths, just as Clara had done with him. He listened more, spoke less, and felt a deeper empathy for the struggles of others. The fame, the demands, the performance, they were still there. But now he carried them with a slightly different understanding. The portrait was a constant silent reminder that behind the dazzling lights there was a man, and that man was worthy of being seen, even in his moments of vulnerability. He knew Clara had captured something deeply personal, something that went beyond public image. And because of that, he felt a profound gratitude for her courage and her talent. He knew he wanted to express that gratitude again, in a way that truly honored her vision and the impact she had made on him. He had an idea, one that would solidify the quiet revolution the painting had started within him. Weeks turned into a couple of months. The portrait remained in Elvis's private study. A silent observer of his changing perspective, he would often find himself sitting there, sometimes with a guitar, sometimes just lost in thought. The painting a muted presence in the periphery of his vision. He no longer felt the sharp sting of discomfort. Instead, A quiet understanding had settled in a deep appreciation for the unvarnished truth. Clara had captured he knew the painting wasn't for public display. It was too personal, too raw, but it wasn't something to be hidden in an attic. It was a significant piece of his own life story, a testament to a moment of profound introspection. One morning, Elvis decided he called Joe Esposito into the study. "Joe," he began, gesturing towards the portrait, "I need you to do something for me, something special." Joe looked at the painting, then at Elvis, a quizzical expression on his face. "Sure thing, E, what's on your mind?" "I want you to build a special custom frame for this," Elvis instructed. "Something simple, elegant, but sturdy. And then I want you to arrange for it to be transported not far to the Tennessee State Museum in Nashville." Joe's jaw dropped slightly. "The State Museum? You want them to display that?" His gaze flickered to the portrait, a ghost of its initial shock still lingering in his eyes. Elvis shook his head, a faint smile playing on his lips. "No, Joe, not for display. I want to donate it to their permanent archives. For study, for future generations, maybe. With a condition?" "A condition?" "That it's not to be put on public exhibit without my explicit permission, or until a certain amount of time has passed after I'm gone," Elvis clarified. "It's a historical piece, Joe. A glimpse into the man, not just the legend. It's for scholarly appreciation." For those slowly nodded, beginning to grasp the deeper meaning. "You want it to be a part of history, but a private part for now." "Exactly," Elvis said. "It's a truth I'm still learning to live with, but it's a truth that deserves to be preserved alongside all the other facets of my life. Clara Vance captured something unique, and her work deserves to be recognized to Clara Vance." It wasn't about the painting itself this time, but about her as an artist and the profound impact she'd had on him. "Dear Clara, I wanted to write to you again, not about the portrait, but about what the experience meant to me. You came to Graceland seeking truth, and you found it. You painted a vision that challenged me, that made me look at myself with new eyes, and for that I am truly grateful. Your courage, your talent, and your unwavering commitment to authenticity are rare and remarkable gifts. You reminded me that true strength often lies in vulnerability, and that there is beauty even in the shadows. You helped me to see myself, not just as a public figure, but as a human being with all the complexities that entails. I have made arrangements to donate the portrait to the permanent archives of the Tennessee State Museum. It will be preserved as a significant work of art, a testament to your unique vision and a historical document of a pivotal moment in my life. It will be held with the understanding that its public display will be deferred out of respect for its deeply personal nature. I hope this decision honors your incredible work and reflects my profound respect for you as an artist and as a person. You have left a lasting impression on me, Clara, one that goes far beyond a canvas. With deepest appreciation and respect, Elvis Presley." He personally ensured the letter, along with a significant uncashed check he'd tried to give her before, was delivered to her by Joe with instructions to make sure she understood it wasn't a rejection, but a gesture of respect. Clara Vance, when she received the letter and the news, was overwhelmed. The donation to the museum, even with the deferred public display, was an immense validation for an artist of her stature. It was an acknowledgement not just of her talent, but of her unique artistic philosophy. The accompanying check, which she eventually accepted, helped her open her own small gallery space in Nashville. The portrait remained in the museum's archives for many years, a quiet secret known only to a few. After Elvis's passing, and much later with the permission of his estate and the input of art historians, it was occasionally brought out for special credited exhibits focusing on the human side of icons or the evolution of portraiture. Each time it was displayed, it generated discussion, not about Elvis's appearance, but about the nature of fame, vulnerability, and artistic truth. It became known as the confessional portrait for Elvis, the experience with Clara Vance, and her unflinching portrait marked a subtle but profound shift. He continued to be the king, to entertain millions, but he carried a deeper understanding of himself. He was more accepting of his own humanity, less afraid of the shadows that came with the dazzling light of his fame. He had faced a truth he hated, a reflection that unsettled him to his core. But instead of reacting with anger or vanity, he had responded with kindness, with respect, and ultimately with acceptance. And in doing so, Elvis Presley had not only honored a gifted artist, but he had also found a deeper, more enduring peace within himself. Kindness he showed Clara Vance was, in the end, a kindness he also learned to extend to the man in the mirror.